Um, Welcome and happy to be here. My name is Maaike, as you can see on the slides. I am the founder of the Excess Materials Exchange, which we describe as a dating site for secondary materials. And I'll tell you a little bit about the journey of how we got there and how we're trying to make this happen. I will have to look at the slide, so I can't see your comments. The presentation is about 20 minutes, and then in the end, there is room for questions. So you can type your questions in the chat while I'm talking. I can't see them then, but for sure I'll address them in the end. Cool. So I have a question for you. What percentage of the products that we buy end up as waste within 6 months? What do you think? You can type it down. You can just keep the answer to yourself. The answer when I found it shocked me. It's 99%. It's ridiculously high. Says a lot about our society at this point in time. And then another question is the percentage of material value that is lost after a single use. Also this you can type if you want, keep it to yourself. The percentage of value that we lose after single use is 95%. And the coffee cups you see in the back are a perfect example of that. We use them once, we drink out of it for maybe 5-10 minutes, and then we throw them away. And all the energy and all the value and resources that went in there to produce have a lifetime of 5 minutes. And very often after that, not much is done with it. So what are we seeing? And Jacco briefly talked about this, but what we're seeing is we're extracting more and more resources over time, and this is billion tons. So we're projected to go to 177 gigatons in 2050. That's an insane amount of resources that we're extracting. And this also shows why we need to talk about resources. We're extracting more and more, but at the same time, we're seeing that the complexity of products that we put on the market is increasing. So in 1700 here, you see a picture of a mill. We had some iron, some calcium, and that composed the majority of the products that we have. Whereas these days, we are surrounded by very complex products that contain a lot of different metals and minerals. Think about our phones, our laptops, solar panels, MRI scanners. So the complexity is increasing. Whereas we might not have a lot of these materials left, and this slide is a very controversial slide. So let me tell you a little bit about scarcity. You have physical scarcity, which is the amount of resources that we know are left in the ground and that we know that we can extract with the current technology. So that's its physical scarcity. But then you also have a lot of political and economic scarcity. So scarcity that actually comes from wars, conflicts, from export restrictions and things like that. So this slide shows you physical scarcity. We have mined a lot of this already, but as we look at this, silver, gold, copper, antimony, we see we're running out of being able to mine it. So then you might think, okay, so we have that all around us. And I think the majority, especially in the Western world, like we're surrounded by all the things that we've mined so far, but we're not doing a lot with it. As seen before, 95% the value is lost after a single use, and we throw away 99% within 6 months. So you see of a lot of valuable metals and minerals, very little is actually recycled. And we're very dependent on other countries for input. In Europe, so mainly on China, we're very dependent on Russia as well, and they're not, as we've seen right now, ideal countries to be dependent on. So what actually happens during a crisis? Right now, we already have very short just-in-time deliveries in our supply chain. So we order something and we expect it to arrive the next day when it's in the Netherlands, when it's from China, like maybe 5 days. People don't have a lot of stock anymore because that isn't necessary, because we're so connected. But then COVID happened. And I put some toilet paper here on the slide because that really illustrates what went wrong. Besides the all of the sudden being a shortage in toilet paper, that was for various reasons. It was because supply chains were disrupted in the actual delivery of the toilet paper, but also because we started using it at very different locations. So whereas usually the majority of the toilet paper actually goes to business sections, so restaurants or offices, now all of a sudden everyone was home. So the distribution didn't work out. And we see this happening a lot, the supply disruptions because of crises. And in this case, it was a health crisis, but this could also be a political crisis or an economic crisis. And because of this globalized world, we're extremely dependent on this. And these are just some news articles that I found that show that it's not about toilet paper, but it's also about plastics. We have supply disruptions in that, so hard to imagine, because we have so much of it. And especially rare earth elements. And rare earth elements, maybe you've heard of that, maybe you haven't. They are a specific group of metals and minerals that we use a lot in our advanced technological appliances, so MRI scanners and solar panels and things like that. So if we actually have a supply disruption in that and there is a delivery issue, we might run into completely different issues regarding energy supply or health monitoring. So it is important that we address that. But right now in Europe, we're not focused. There's not a lot of urgency on recycling, and more, thankfully, it's coming. And even so much that this crisis helped, because ABN AMRO and Ipsos, they are one of the few that I found that have actually conducted research, and they show now that after COVID and after people have been in lockdown and experienced all these disruptions, not just supply disruptions, but many other disruptions, 71% actually want an economic system that is respectful of the environment. Before, that number was, I think, on around 14. And 50% is willing to change their own behavior. This is very new as well. Before, we always lived in the understanding that, oh, sure, we all want to be circular and sustainable, but as long as it doesn't involve me. So this is an amazing result, actually, of the tragedy that's going on. And then we have some ambitions as the Netherlands as well. So we have said in the Dutch Resources Agreement that in 2030, the Netherlands wants to consume 50% less primary resources. And in 2050, there should be 100%, which basically says in 2050, we want to become 100% circular. So how are we going to do that? Because right now, we're still dealing with supply disruptions in toilet paper. And what you need for that is information about the quality of materials, about the timing. Like when you take down a building is not necessarily when you need the materials from the building, for example, the window frames for another building. The quantity, there's 10 window frames coming out, but I actually need a 50. So how am I going to deal with that? And then the location, the building was in Groningen, but I'm going to construct a new building in Maastricht. How am I going to arrange that? And at this point in time, this information actually isn't really there, which is why it's not really happening, and which is why the recycling rates are so low, besides the business case being very, very difficult to make. So what have we done? We have set up the excess materials exchange, and we actually match supply and demand of materials, and materials with their highest value reuse option. And what highest value mean is that right now materials very often have a destination, but that destination is sometimes even the incineration. So then, like, your materials are really, really gone. You can't reuse them ever again. Sometimes before that, there's a lot of steps you can take. And we look into a positive financial business case, environmental impact reduction, and the social impact. Because what we see happening, for example, with textiles, is that Textiles are now promoted as circular, but they have been processed under very poor conditions in third world countries. And we do not want to say that that then actually is circular. For us, that is not high value. So what we do is match supply and demand of these materials. And how do we do that? First of all, we start by giving materials an identity. As I said, right now, we very often don't know what's in products. What exactly is in my phone? How is it linked to each other? Can I deconstruct it? And how much money is it going to cost me to actually put the phone apart and then separate the materials? Right now, it's hard to make that business case because we don't know what's in it. So we start by giving materials and products an identity in the form of a resources passport. And this is a modular digital identity for a product that travels along with the product through the supply chain and into a new application after recycling. Then what we do is we add intelligence, and we do that in the form of blockchain and AI. And I know these are buzzwords. The reason that we use blockchain is that the idea of a marketplace is not a new idea, of course. But what is difficult, especially on a large scale exchanging materials, is that you need to know the information about the materials if you want to make the transaction. But companies do not want to have their private information made public. So you actually have a gap between the need for transparency and the need for privacy. And now there is a blockchain protocol that helps overcome this gap. It's called zero knowledge proof, which is wonderful. And then we have programmed everything to make it self-learning, because what we see in order to make an optimal match, lots of factors come into play, is location, quality, quantity, timing, but also permit information, legal status, and these configurations changes every time. So if you can make that automatic and eventually self-learning, it's a lot faster and easier to exchange secondary materials on a large scale. And then thirdly, we take an integral approach. And what that means is actually that we don't only look for applications within the same sector, but we look for new destinations between sectors. And a very easy example of that is coffee leftovers. Maybe you just went to get coffee, but in a restaurant, if you make coffee, after that you have coffee leftovers and you throw them away, because like making coffee out of that again is not very tasty. So for the restaurant, the coffee is actually a waste, whereas you can also use it to extract pigments, to make ink, fibers, bioplastics, water filters, and you can use it to grow mushrooms on it. And this you can all do in cascade. So that means it's not one or the other. It means you can do all of these steps. And those are all different sectors, hence the integral approach. So I came up with two examples, so you actually have an idea of what we do. So one of the things we did is we still work with ProRail, the Dutch railway company, and we look at their railroad tracks and what we can do with it. And right now, they're sold for scrap metal price and very often also leave Europe. So they go back to smelters in Asia very often. And we looked for new high-value matches, and some of the matches are use them again as railroad tracks, as support beams in buildings, and as quay walls, kademuur in Dutch. And the question to you, and still you can answer in the chat or you can answer just in your head, is which of these three matches do you think has the highest value next to use destination? So has the best financial business case and the highest environmental impact reduction? Give you a moment to think. The answer is support beam. We see that the financial value increases fourfold and the carbon emission reduction is about 80%, which is gigantic. So right now we're working with a construction company to actually make this happen, which is amazing. And I have another example, orange peels. And this we looked at with Sodexo and Schiphol, amongst others, many other companies. And right now, there's many different things you can do with orange peels. I wrote down 3, but I could have wrote down 12 as well. And the question to you is, what do you think in this case is also the highest value match? Is it limonene, which is extracted from the orange outer layer, and you can use it as cleaning detergent, the fibers which come out of the white inner layer, or make biogas out of it? And give you a moment to think as well, which is the highest value next to use destination. And it is actually a combination of limonene and fiber. There's a process where you can use both, and that results in a 50% cost reduction and 105% CO2 reduction, which is incredible. It's because we prevent other products from being used, hence it's more than 100. So what does it look like right now? Well, it looks like any other marketplace. This is a screenshot. This is a screenshot of the resources passport. So this is this digital identity of the actual physical product. And in this case, it's roof plates. It gives you pictures of what they look like, where they're positioned right now, information about the functionality, about owners, about processes that are being used, the composition. Like I think there's maybe 220 fields that can be filled in, so it's a lot. But most importantly, the seller, so we can make a match. And then we have the valuation dashboard. So we give insights into the environmental and financial impact reduction. In this case, the environmental impact reduction, and we look at 17 criteria, from fresh water to mineral resource scarcity to toxicity. And we also convert, so that is like the left side. And then the right side talks about eco costs. And what that means is that we have converted, together with EY and TU Delft, the environmental impact numbers into financial numbers. So it's easier to compare. As mentioned in the plenary, CFOs very often only look at the bottom line. So it's helpful to actually convert this environmental impact into a financial number. And then we have the actual financial numbers, and we look at the current end-of-life value. That's what EOL means. The reuse value, which is actually reusing the product as a product, or component as a component, and the recycling value. And that is when you bring it back to the material value and reuse it again. And you see that they're all different values. So this is helpful in strategic decision-making for how am I actually going to become circular and exchange secondary materials. So we've done a large-scale pilot program with these companies. You see ProRail Schiphol, so Dexo, Rijkswaterstaat, Philips, Arend. And we looked at 17 different waste streams within these companies. You see here a depiction of some of these waste streams. Together, they were 70,000 tons, or 7 Eiffel Towers. And by finding a higher value destination, we found that we can actually create 64 million euros of financial value, which is an insane amount, much more than we thought for just 17 streams in 10 companies. We saw that we saved enough energy to light the streetlights in Paris for 5 years. We have saved enough carbon emissions to have the whole city of Amsterdam, which is, I think, 863,000 people, all get into a car and drive from Amsterdam to Milan in saved carbon emissions. And we saved enough water to fill up 860 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So these results were much more insane than we actually thought. Now I'm coming back to the chat. Oh, great, people responded. So that's what we're doing, and at the moment we're scaling up what we're doing internationally with the more corporates to actually create a speeding up in this large-scale exchange of secondary materials. And thank you for listening and being present in this conversation. If you have any questions, please type them, because then I can address them. See, no questions yet. People guessed well, that's great. Ah, yeah, great question. Thank you, Paul. Paul asks if we're planning to look in agricultural streams. So we see, as you saw with the people from the pilot project, we basically started off with just a big plate of spaghetti, and that is all the sectors, and we just threw it against the wall and looked at like which sectors are really excited about this. And we see that building and construction is very interested in this, infrastructure, packaging, organics. So that is agricultural, but the organics are mainly coming more from facilities and textiles. So those are our biggest sectors at the moment. And yes, we are connected to the urban mining network. Yeah, they are a separate network than we are because they're mainly focused on urban mining, so mining from buildings. And what we do is specifically look between the matches from that sector and other sectors, but we definitely work together. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for listening. It's an interesting format this way. I think if there's no more questions, we can use it again to get some more coffee and take a small break. Oh, where can we find the reports? Yes, so I'll type our website. It's there as well, but now you can click on it, I think. So what we've done, we published a pilot report, which you can find on the website. You can also apply for a demo to see what it actually looks like interactively. And we just released a position paper with Stibbe, which is a law firm that we work with, because we see when you want to exchange materials on a large scale, there's a lot that you run into about the carpet industry, and that you can find on LinkedIn. Thanks, everyone. I'm gonna stop sharing. Yeah, thanks for listening. And let's reconvene at the stage.